January 2026. California drivers pull up to the pump and see something unthinkable: $4.22 per gallon. While Americans nationwide celebrate gas under $3, Californians are paying almost 50% more and watching the gap grow. But this isn't just about numbers. This is about warnings ignored, decisions made behind closed doors, and a question nobody in Sacramento wants to answer. How did we get here? Phillips 66 just shut down its Los Angeles refinery last October. Gone. 139,000 barrels per day vanished from California's fuel supply. Valero announced its Benicia facility closes this April. Another 145,000 barrels gone. Do the math. That's nearly 20% of California's total refining capacity, wiped out in 6 months. Chevron relocated its corporate headquarters to Houston. The message from Big Oil is clear: California has become too expensive, too restrictive, too hostile to operate. And Governor Gavin Newsom? His office has been remarkably quiet. This story begins years ago, when California set the most aggressive climate targets in American history. Phase out fossil fuels, mandate electric vehicles, punish polluters. Noble goals, perhaps. But energy experts warned repeatedly: you cannot eliminate refining capacity faster than you build alternatives. You cannot regulate an industry into submission without consequences. Those warnings were dismissed as industry propaganda. Now the consequences are here. In March 2023, Governor Newsom signed legislation empowering California regulators to set maximum profit margins for refineries. The goal? Prevent price gouging. The result? Companies like Phillips 66 announced closure plans within 18 months. Executives testified the regulations made long-term investments impossible. They warned of supply disruptions. They predicted California would become dependent on imported fuel at premium prices. The administration responded by accusing oil companies of lying and fear-mongering. But the closures kept coming. Phillips 66 didn't just shut down operations. They dismantled entire production lines. Hundreds of workers received termination notices. Union leaders expressed shock at the speed of the collapse. California had already lost refining capacity steadily since 2020, but this was different. This was deliberate. This was industry saying enough is enough. Now here's where it gets critical. California produces 90% of its gasoline from in-state refineries. Unlike Texas or Louisiana, which can import fuel from neighboring states cheaply, California uses a special fuel blend required by environmental law. That means California cannot easily replace lost capacity. When refineries go offline, prices spike immediately. A single fire, a maintenance shutdown, any disruption, and pump prices surge. The California Energy Commission has acknowledged this vulnerability for years. They have published report after report documenting the fragility of the fuel supply chain. Yet regulatory pressure only increased. UC Davis researchers released a study in July 2025 projecting catastrophic outcomes. They calculated that by August 2026, when the full effect of refinery closures hits, California gas prices could rise by $1.21 per gallon. That would push the average to over $5.50. Some stations in Los Angeles and San Francisco could hit $8 per gallon. The researchers were not fringe activists. They were credentialed academics using conservative estimates. Their report landed like a bomb in Sacramento. Governor Newsom's response? He disputed the projections. His office called them exaggerated worst-case scenarios. But when pressed for alternative forecasts, they provided none. When asked what contingency plans existed to prevent shortages, they pointed to vague proposals about increasing fuel imports and encouraging private investment in import infrastructure. Increasing imports from where? At what cost? California's special fuel blend can only be produced by a handful of West Coast refineries. Importing from overseas is exponentially more expensive and logistically complex. Energy analysts noted the irony. California spent decades building regulations to reduce dependence on foreign oil, and now faces having no choice but to import at inflated prices. California's congressional delegation began sounding alarms. Republicans and Democrats warned that refinery closures posed national security risks. They noted California's fuel supply impacts Nevada, Arizona, and other western states. They requested federal intervention. They urged the governor to pause implementation of new refinery regulations. In June 2025, the California Energy Commission finally recommended a 10-year pause on refinery margin caps. They acknowledged the regulations were accelerating closures and threatening supply stability, but the damage was already done. Phillips 66 had ceased operations. Valero had locked in its closure date. Chevron had moved. The exodus was irreversible. And then came the political theatre. Governor Newsom held press conferences blaming oil companies for abandoning California families. He accused them of prioritising profits over people. He framed the closures as corporate greed, not policy consequences. But workers who lost jobs told a different story. They described an industry strangled by compliance costs, legal battles, and uncertainty. They said companies tried to negotiate, tried to find middle ground, and were met with ultimatums. They said Sacramento wanted refineries gone, and now act surprised when they leave. Meanwhile, California drivers face impossible choices: fill the tank or pay rent, commute to work or cut back hours. Small businesses calculate whether fuel costs will force them to raise prices or shut down. Trucking companies consider relocating operations out of state. The ripple effects extend far beyond the pump. Every product transported by truck becomes more expensive. Every service requiring vehicle travel passes costs to consumers. Inflation, already painful, accelerates. Governor Newsom recently gave his final State of the State address. He touted California's leadership on climate change. He celebrated zero-emission vehicle adoption. He mentioned clean energy investments. He acknowledged briefly that gas prices are the highest in the nation and families are struggling. But he offered no detailed plan to address refinery closures. No timeline for increasing supply. No acknowledgement that his own policies contributed to the crisis. Instead, he emphasized California's role as a model for the world, a model experiencing fuel supply collapse and price spikes the rest of the country isn't seeing. Here's the uncomfortable truth. California wanted to transition away from fossil fuels. That is a legitimate policy choice. But transitions require planning, phasing, and alternatives. You cannot force industry out before infrastructure is ready. You cannot regulate supply into oblivion while demand remains high. And you cannot ask working families to bear the cost of experimental policy with no safety net. That is not leadership. That is ideology without accountability. So what happens next? California now faces mid-2026 with diminished refining capacity, rising demand from summer driving season, and limited options. If another refinery experiences unplanned downtime, prices could explode overnight. If geopolitical events disrupt global fuel markets, California will compete for imports at inflated costs. If regulations force additional closures, the state faces genuine shortages. And the governor's plan? Hope that electric vehicle adoption accelerates fast enough to reduce gasoline demand. Hope that private companies invest billions in import infrastructure. Hope that prices stabilise. Hope. This is not a story about climate denial. This is a story about policy consequences, about warnings ignored, about industry driven away, about families paying the price for decisions made in air-conditioned offices by people who do not pump their own gas. California's gas crisis was predictable. It was predicted. and it was preventable. The question now is whether anyone will be held accountable, or whether Sacramento will continue blaming everyone except the people who made the rules. $4.22 per gallon today, $5.50 projected by August, maybe $8 by year's end. How high does it have to go before someone admits this was a mistake?